member of the board.
Dominique Cobb, Vice Chair, Planner.
And over here. There you go.
Tom Pluckon, archaeologist, University of South Florida.
Mary Shoecraft, historic preservationist and owner of a construction company.
We have before us, Commissioners, the minutes from the previous meeting of April 4. Are there any comments or corrections to those minutes? Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve as submitted?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved.
Good evening, Commissioners. Kamaria Pettisnako from the City Attorney's Office. Will the Commissioners please state whether or not they have a conflict of interest regarding the item that's listed on the agenda? For the record, none of the Commissioners have any conflicts of interest. Additionally, will the Commissioners please state whether or not they've had any ex parte communications regarding the item that's on the agenda? Thank you so much.
Good evening, Commissioners. Dennis Fernandez, Architecture Review and Historic Preservation Manager. Prior to getting started, we need to administer a swear-in. So anyone in the audience who's going to be providing testimony this evening, please stand and raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be providing this evening is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioners, first of all, thank you very much for modifying your schedules to allow for an evening meeting in order to facilitate public discussion and participation. We appreciate that. Also, we appreciate all the individuals, property owners, and interested parties who have decided to attend this evening and participate. We also have letters to submit into the record at the appropriate time. But moving on to the agenda item, we have a request to expand the Hyde Park Local Historic District boundaries, which was submitted by the Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association and the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association. They will address the board momentarily. This item's been before you a few times over the last couple of years for updates. I want to go ahead and, for the benefit of the process and for those who may not have seen the presentation prior, present the presentation again with the staff recommendation. So if I could begin with the PowerPoint. Is that on your screens? It is? Okay, very good. This hearing's in reference to consideration of the expansion of the local historic district in Hyde Park. You may be familiar with the Hyde Park district map. The map is a tool for the staff in determining both contributing and non-contributing status as well as the boundaries of the historic district. The historic district has two principal components. It has a national register district, which is indicated in the blue line on the map. That was established in 1985. That's when the original inventory for the area would have been completed through the State Historic Preservation Office. The red line is indicating the Hyde Park Local Historic District map, or boundaries. The red line does indicate the area that is the focus of this evening's hearing, in that the boundary lines being adjusted is part of a designation process, which I'll get into in just a moment. The local historic district has been in existence since 1988 under local ordinance, and the development in that area is reviewed through the Architecture Review Commission. So for the benefit of discussion, National Register designations, they bring recognition to an area. It's a designation that is allowed by the Department of the Interior, working through the Division of Historical Resources in the State Historic Preservation Office. It's a designation of distinction that an area, site, object meets certain criteria to be considered historic to the integrity of the district, an area, a person, or an event. It brings a modest layer of protection from federally funded projects, and one you may be familiar with is interstate expansion. When that is introduced through a historic district, there's a mitigation process that has to be completed. Local historic designation is done through local ordinance. It brings in typically an architectural review process, as it does in the city of Tampa, and it brings a protective ordinance from demolition that brings a heightened review process when structures that are considered contributing or that have a historic level of integrity are proposed for demolition. So specifically, a local historic district results in an ordinance that's passed for a significant concentration, linkage, continuity of sites, buildings, structures, or objects united historically or aesthetically by plan or physical development. And that becomes part of the criteria for designation. And it does bring district significant properties, those that are considered contributing, those that have historic character. It brings protection to those and encourages sensitive development through the architectural review process. The Hyde Park neighborhood was facilitated in the late 1880s by the construction of the Lafayette Bridge, which we today refer to as the Kennedy Boulevard Bridge. It made the areas west of the river accessible to Tampa and promoted the development of Hyde Park. The area was named by O.H. Platt of Hyde Park, Illinois, who purchased 20 acres for development in 1886. Citrus groves covered much of the area west of the river until building in Tampa's first suburb prevailed. By 1910, large citrus groves many owned by William A. Morrison and James A. Walters, had been subdivided, encompassing nearly 100 acres of buildable parcels. This area was recognized through both national and local historic designation as possessing a period of significance from its inception in 1886 up to its primary period of development, which is recognized in 1933. Within the district boundaries for the local district, there are 834 contributing structures, those structures that are built within the period of significance and still possess their historic character. And then there's 433 non-contributing structures, or structures that are built outside the period of historic significance or that have been significantly altered to lose their architectural relevance. I'll summarize this at the end of the presentation again, but just so you understand a little bit about what your role tonight is and what the process is as a whole for those in the audience. An application, or two applications in this sense, were received in May of 2021 by the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association and the Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association, requesting that the boundaries of the local historic district be considered for expansion from the area of the Selman Expressway on the north, south to the existing boundaries along De Leon, west to the Crosstown Expressway, and east to the extent of Bayshore Boulevard. There's been a number of meetings, both facilitated through the neighborhood and those through the HPC. You see those dates delineated on the slide. This is another step in the process. The first being that the application for designation was received, and this board had authorized staff to begin work on the research that's necessary. The staff did conduct a great deal of research. We inventoried the area, had to re-inventory the built environment because of the length of time that had passed since the last survey. We participated in the community meetings, as I mentioned, and produced a report, which you have a draft of this evening. The next step in accordance with Section 27-256 of the code is for this board to consider a recommendation to City Council if it chooses fit to do so, appropriate to do so. The process does require a notice public hearing. That is this hearing this evening. We did notice this public hearing in accordance with 27-149, both through mailed notice and posted notice to the affected property owners, the neighborhood associations in the vicinity, and property owners in excess of 250 feet of the boundaries. So that was conducted. If the commission decides to make a recommendation this evening to move forward, there would be a review of that recommendation by the Hillsborough County City County Planning Commission. There's a 30-day period that they have to be able to review and comment back to the city on this proposal. And then following that, there will be 2 notice public hearings scheduled at Tampa City Council for consideration of your recommendation. Just to give you some context about the associations and their proximity to the boundaries, this district map, once again, overlaid with the neighborhood associations in the area, shows you the 3 principal neighborhood associations that compose the historic district: the Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association, the Hyde Park Preservation, Inc., and Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association, which is the majority of the area that we're looking at this evening. Kind of zooming in on the area that we're looking at, the current northern boundary of the local historic district on the western segment of the district is at De Leon Street. That then moves up to Platt and moves east. There's a couple segments along Bayshore Boulevard as you intersect with Platt and Bayshore that were excluded from the local when it was formulated. The areas north of the current boundary line are located in the National Register District, so they do have the recognition but not the protections. Through discussions with this board, we have refined the area that is being considered this evening and choosing not to incorporate the entire district based on the inventory numbers that we received, which I'll review in just a moment. But the entire area was evaluated initially, and we did have discussions at this commission about what we had determined in that area. Historically, once again, looking at the blue line indicating the National Register District and the red line indicating the local historic district, this is the 1931 Sanborn Company map, which we use quite a bit to determine historic patterns and the presence of historic buildings for a particular year. These are a very great resource for our city. We're very fortunate to have them, especially within our historic neighborhoods, and they're used quite often by various divisions within the city. Just to show you some of the patterns of development that existed in 1931, this would have been at a time when Hyde Park was building out. You see the buildings in the yellow are structures that were mainly composed of lumber construction. The ones in the red are constructed of masonry, typically brick construction, sometimes clay tile construction. And then the ones in the blue are actually concrete block and steel construction. So they're very helpful, and they do determine or help us determine when structures are historically present during a particular year. As I mentioned, the early development of Hyde Park, we have some photos, fortunately through the Burgett Brothers collection, that we can study today and enjoy. You see some of the photos here looking southwest from downtown, the photo on the left, across the river towards the bay. The center is a photo of Hyde Park Avenue. You see the streetcars that existed at that time. And then another one from downtown looking into Hyde Park, across the river into the bay, and showing some of the density of structures that existed at that particular time in 1915. Through the examination of the history of the area, we were fortunate to have a good base amount of information for the existing local historic district to work off of, but there was nuances to this particular area that are relevant to an expansion discussion. One of which is the existence of Dobyville. Dobyville on your map is indicated in the green square. Portion of this is within the boundaries that we're discussing this evening. Dobyville was named for longtime resident Richard C. Doby, who was also, the area is also referred to as West Hyde Park. By the 1920s, Dobyville was one of the area's primary African-American neighborhoods. The approximate boundaries of Dobyville extend from Gray Street on the north to Horatio Street on the south, from Albany on the west to Willow Avenue on the east. In the early 1900s, many of Hyde Park's African-American residents worked in the homes of the area's affluent residents. And on the west side of the Hyde Park community, they built their own community. With the help of Richard C. Doby, its namesake, Dobyville grew. Mr. Doby couldn't read or write, but he helped pen the history of Dobyville and Tampa at the same time. At the turn of the 20th century, he donated land for public purposes, for churches, and for a school. Dobyville School, beginning back in 1910, was located at 307 South Dakota, but was demolished in the 1960s. Mr. Doby also donated the land that constituted the Zion Cemetery, which was recently rediscovered. Some photos of some of the recognition and history of Dobyville. Dobyville was significantly impacted by the introduction of the Crosstown Expressway. There is a marker at the corner of Platt and Willow that commemorates the area and Mr. Doby's contribution. The original Richard Doby House is located within the boundaries of the area that we're considering today. It's currently within the National District, but left unprotected by local designation. And there are still some of the original Doby houses that are present in that area as well. It's difficult to have a discussion about this particular area without acknowledging the Crosstown Expressway and its role in how the area has been formed to date. You see some of the images, in this case from 1957, prior to the expressway being introduced, but it was under consideration. The large building in the center of the screen is the Seabold Bakery as a point of reference. And you have essentially the railway that is kind of bisecting from the upper left to the lower right. I have a series of photos to assist in kind of visualizing the introduction of the Crosstown. I'm going to go through these again. They go a little fast for maybe you to appreciate. So beginning in 1973, you see the area prior to the introduction of the Crosstown Expressway. And by 1975, that area is under construction. You see many of the structures in that area beginning to somewhat disappear. By 1976, the Crosstown Expressway opened. And then by 1980, it was well in place. And you see how somewhat the area somewhat became separated from some of its original context. That's one reason why when you look at the National Register map, it extends north of the Crosstown because it's recognizing the original parameters of Hyde Park. This is how that area appears today, with an overlay of both the local district, the national district, and the Dobyville area. Wanted to present you some overview of some of the architectural styles that are present in the area and some of those that are unique to this area, aside from the wonderful collection of the built history that we have in the existing district. These are some of the structures, and you see the map kind of coordinating with the various pictures of where these were taken. Some of the residential structures that are sprinkled throughout the proposed expansion area. These are some of the, I'll say, currently commercial structures. Some of them are residential structures that have been converted to commercial uses that are present. Some of those within the district and some of those north of Platt Street. Here's an example of some of the remaining structures in Dobyville area. You see the structures here are much more modest. The lots are smaller, and typically the architectural styles were more simple, composed of shotgun houses and cottages. The structure at the top of the screen is the Richard Doby House. And then some of the commercial structures or civic buildings, some multifamily buildings that are also in the area. Styles ranging from Spanish eclectic to craftsman to Mediterranean to Florida vernaculars. So this is a map of the original 1985 historic resources inventory. At that time, there were 200 in the area that we're discussing this evening, not the entire national district, but this proposed study area that we've been looking at. There were 239 contributing or contributing structures and 103 non-contributing for a total of 342 structures. And there's various color coding that went into their contributing status or the degree of alteration that they may have documented as well. One principal factor, and I'll show you, you'll hear about this tonight, that is of concern to the neighborhood are underlying zoning classifications that promote redevelopment over retention of existing structures, rather contributing or non-contributing. That results from multifamily zoning classifications such as RM24, which are indicated on this map in the light, I guess, light blue color, where you have the RS50 in the light purple color, and other residential multifamily zoning in the darker blue color. And then the peach color is planned development. So those are what's referred to as a PD, which are site plan controlled development categories for parcels. Usually those parcels have been redeveloped already. These categories, particularly the multifamily zoning, when a single family structure is situated on a multifamily zoning, developers will often seek to maximize the development of that particular parcel. As a result, we've seen a number of demolitions since we began to consider protective ordinances in the area. We've had a fairly steady flow of these in both situations where older homes are situated on single-family or multifamily zoning lots. There's a variety of new construction in the area. Some are single family, some are two to four family dwellings, and then multiple family developments. Here's some examples of the various architectural styles. Some of the original patterns of the district, the original grid that promoted the use of the alleys has been somewhat ignored in some of the developments where front-loading garages have been added on to the street. So in looking at the area, this is a map that we've looked at a couple times at both neighborhood meetings and with this commission. We broke, through our examination and analysis, we began to break down areas about the content of those areas as regarded with contributing and non-contributing structures. So at our last meeting, there was a decision made to pursue the area that you have on your agenda this evening, mainly because the portion that was east of Hyde Park Avenue contained only one contributing structure. So it was felt that that area would be better off developing with market conditions. The area north does still, north of the Crosstown Expressway does still contain a few contributing structures, a low percentage of those as considered the vacant parcels, but it was viewed that perhaps a multiple properties designation would be more appropriate for that segment, or some new larger development and commercial and institutional development is underway. And then the subject area, which we have calculated contains 102 contributing structures and 111 non-contributing structures for a total of 213 structures. So looking at the data, we've field verified this as recently as last Friday. The existing historic district contains, as I mentioned at the beginning, 834 contributing structures, 433 non-contributing, for a total of 1,267 structures. That's a 66 percentage point of contributing to non-contributing structures, which is a very legitimate historic designation range. Typically, for an independent district, you're looking at 55% or greater. Now, what we're talking about is an expansion, so that kind of changes the nuance of the discussion a little bit, but independently, the area that we're looking at contains 102 contributing structures and 111 non-contributing, as I mentioned. I think one point to kind of keep in mind is the quality over the quantity sometimes, which is in this case with the existence of Dobyville as part of the area is a consideration point, a special note in your decision making. These two areas, as presented, were combined. There would be a total of 1,480 structures in the local historic district. 936 of those would be contributing, 544 non-contributing, with a cumulative percentage of 63%. In meeting with the neighborhood associations and many of their members and their adjacent neighbors as well who have participated in some of the meetings, some of the benefits of local historic designation that have been discussed is the recognition of a neighborhood and its history. I think you have a obvious connection between the area north of the district, both in the way that the area is designed and within its architectural context. However, it currently lacks much of the recognition of a historic area that the local historic district enjoys. There's increased property values that come with local historic designation. Those property values have been documented in numerous studies by empirical data that shows that properties within a local historic district appreciate and hold their value at a higher rate than those outside of a comparable local historic district. There are preservation incentives that are enacted when a district is formulated. There's a couple different ones, but the one that's very popular is a ad valorem tax exemption program that it can be initiated by a property owner to essentially receive a property tax exemption on improvements to historic buildings that's in place for 10 years. The architecture review process is also often a controversial component of local historic designation. It brings with it an additional review prior to permitting that ensures compatibility of design and form in a historic area. Often in the development review process, my staff and through the Architecture Review Commission or the Barrio Latino Commission in Ybor City will work with property owners on meeting the district goals, those represented in the relevant set of design guidelines prior to there being a review. Many reviews are administrative, and then some, like new construction, rise to the level of a commission review. For those reviews, there's public notice, so owners will be notified through sign postings and mail when there's going to be significant changes to a particular structure within the designated boundaries. That notice brings with it the opportunity to participate. That extends to not only the construction of structures within a district or additions, but also to participating in the discussion on variances and land use changes that may impact the area. Generally, the ARC reviews for compatibility and ensures that the historic integrity of a district is safeguarded. The certificate of appropriateness process can deal with new construction, additions, exterior alterations, relocations, and demolitions. It's important to note that the jurisdiction of the ARC is on the external components of buildings and sites and does not extend into the internal part of a structure. The board also reviews variances, so there's somewhat of a streamlined process for property owners that have a hardship and need to request a variance. They would not have to make two applications to two different review agencies. And then, as I mentioned, they do provide recommendations for land use changes, so that would be rezonings or comprehensive land use changes, amendments that are considered by City Council. The recommendations are at a public hearing as well, so there's participation, and there is an opportunity to comment and forward the recommendation to City Council with those comments. And then, as I mentioned, the preservation incentives, the Commission also sits in determination of the appropriateness of those incentives for a particular project. So going back to the process and where we're at this evening, the staff has provided you with a designation report, a map that gives you eligible areas for expansion of the district, we believe, and has provided you with a staff report indicating the relevant segments of the code that apply to this particular discussion. So the staff recommendation for these particular applications is that the Hyde Park Historic District meets the requirements of Section 27257A 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3, and Section 27257B for local historic designation. Specifically, that the area and its expanded area are associated with significant events, in particular that dealing with community planning, the fact that Hyde Park is an original Tampa neighborhood, a pioneer neighborhood, and that it still retains its original urban planning perspectives. Second, that's associated with significant persons. There's a number of significant Tampa pioneer families that are associated with the development of Hyde Park. Just a few, to name a few. O.H. Platt, William A. Morrison, James M. Waltrus, Sumter L. Laurie, Kate Jackson, Richard C. Doby, M. Leo Elliott, just to name a few of those. There's many, many more. And that the area embodies a distinctive characteristic of architecture represented by the work of a master possessing artistic values and represents a distinguishable entity. So that third one deals with the value of the architecture in the area and the fact that that architecture rises to a level that warrants protection. So to come back to what your role is in this evening's hearing, if the HPC recommends or determines that it is appropriate for the applications before you to be forwarded to City Council for consideration, the staff recommends that you go through this following order of elements. Consider the staff report, the designation report, the exhibits and testimony presented at this public hearing. Determine if the proposed designation meets the criteria delineated in section 27257A and B. That section of the code is in your staff report, and it is summarized for you, I believe, on the second page. Determine the appropriate boundary that's to be reflected on the local Hyde Park Historic District inventory map. The area that's been studied is, in the staff's opinion, eligible. However, you have the ability to adjust those boundaries to an area that you feel appropriate. Determine the completeness of the designation report and specify any necessary amendments. And then lastly would be to form a motion to City Council as to whether the application should be approved. With that, I'd like to invite up the representatives from the two neighborhood associations that presented the application to address the commission. Thank you.
Hey folks, thanks for having us, appreciate your time. My name is Aaron Albretz. I'm the president of Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association, and I'm also a resident of Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek, naturally. The Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek neighborhood is located within the Hyde Park area of South Tampa. Dennis hit on it a little earlier, but I'd like to even note further that Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek is Tampa's earliest known settlement. It was established in the early 1800s by Cuban fishermen. So we are the original Tampa Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek. Today, Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek is comprised of approximately 2,025 homes. The streets in the district are made up of lots of moderate size with a mixture of historic bungalows, of which my own house is a historic bungalow over 102 years old. Constructed in the late 19th and early 20th century, several of which are particularly noteworthy examples of a historic nature, one might say. It's also the home of the culturally and historically significant Dobyville. This is a focus of mine personally and my association, our association, and that's what I'd like to talk about tonight. Dobyville was a historic black neighborhood in what is now Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek. It was named for Richard Doby, R.C. Doby, a resident and philanthropic African-American businessman and community leader. Richard Doby helped write the history of Dobyville in Tampa. At the turn of the 20th century, as mentioned earlier, he donated multiple parcels of land for public purposes. Emphasis on public purposes to the city and to Tampa. A 1927 study found that more than 10% of Tampa's African-American population called Dobyville home. One of the historic buildings, one of a few that remain today, is the original Doby family home on Azeel Street. Still stands today. The Siebold Bakery, located at 420 South Dakota Avenue, was built in 1926 in the heart of Dobyville, adjacent to the old railroad that ran through there. The bakery contributed to the commerce and stability of the area and provided employment to many of the people living in that neighborhood. The Siebold Bakery building is identified as a contributing structure within the National Register District of Hyde Park today. It has a nice plaque on the side of the building. Richard Doby donated, as I said, the land for multiple public uses, one of which was the Dobyville School, which was a segregated public facility for African Americans. The Dobyville School was formerly located at 407 South Dakota Avenue. The school's lunchroom was condemned in the late 1940s, but children still attended until 1966 when the school was closed. And it was demolished for the construction of the Selman Expressway. As noted as well, but just to hit on again, Richard Doby also donated land for the Zion Cemetery in Tampa, thought to contain some 850 burials. The cemetery was washed away by redevelopment in the area. The National Trust for Historic Preservation included much of Dobyville in the Hyde Park Historic District when it landmarked this area in 1985. Hyde Park was designated locally 3 years later after the national recognition, but the area that Dobyville occupied was excluded from that specifically, that local designation. It was cut out of that. Such an exclusion means that historic properties in the area and what was formerly Dobyville are not currently protected or offered or afforded minimal protection, if anything. Finally, it's worth noting all the years and the time and the effort that have gone into public outreach and education on this particular specific expansion. Both associations, HHP&A and ourselves, have hosted multiple and well-attended public education meetings over the years, individually, but also in coordination with the ARC. Most recently, as part of the historic Hyde Park home tour in March, we've placed multiple signs, held multiple public discussions, neighborhood email distributions. I'd like to note specifically, we've had articles recently in the Tampa Bay Times, 83 Degrees, Creative Loafing, our neighborhood newsletters regarding the expansion and the timeline and what we were trying to do. This is in addition to our video spots on CBS. I'm kind of famous locally now. No, don't want to autographs afterwards. Bay News 9, our local ABC affiliate. I myself have had discussions with developers and multiple neighbors on the topic. All three Hyde Park neighborhood associations, comprised of the actual people and actual neighbors who reside in this neighborhood, have considered this, have voted on this, and have agreed to move forward with supporting the next steps in the process. I am confident that we have done everything and more to educate and promote the expansion. This particular initiative was started almost 10 years ago, and its time is of the essence as development and demolitions, as was noted, continue to ramp up. Historic preservation within the Hyde Park area is one of our central mandates for the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Board. It's not a vanity project for name recognition. We're saving history, in some cases, actual historic landmarks, such as areas surrounding the Colonel Knight home, the Seabold Bakery, the Cricket Tea Room, which is something I've recently been educated about. It's the namesake of the regionally famous cookbook, the Cricket Tea Room, and of course, the Dobie family home. With that in mind, we feel we have met the application criteria, and we submitted our application to expand the local historic area with the thought that we might be able to better secure and be a part of the conversation in a more formal fashion in our neighborhood. We kindly ask the HPC moves this process forward so that our neighbors and ourselves may have the opportunity to have the issue discussed in the forum of our Tampa City Council. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Aaron. My name is Patrick Cimino. I live at 604 South Oregon Avenue. I'm used to being a respondent with a 3-minute limit. Now I'm a petitioner, and I don't have a limit, but my talk is only about 3 minutes. I hope you're not disappointed. So anyway, I'm the Vice President of Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association, and I want to thank the Historic Preservation Commission and the ARC, particularly the staff members, Dennis and Elaine, because they've put in a lot of interest, time, and effort into historic preservation in Hyde Park. And I want to thank my peer neighborhood organizations as well. The process of creating the local historic district, as you've already heard, started in the 1980s. The expansion has been long in coming, and time is now of the essence, as you've heard. The particular initiatives that we're talking about tonight, even though the petition wasn't submitted until last year, it's been going on 7 years. So this is a very long process, and it's critical to preserve remaining parts, particularly the Dobyville area that you've heard a lot about. The Hyde Park neighborhood is recognized by locals and visitors for the value of its historic, tree-lined streets with sidewalks, that have really are the essence of our historic attraction. The particular HHP&A, we just held our 20th annual home tour, and almost 900 people attended that. Some were, a couple were at least from Germany and one from France. So we had a lot of people recognize Hyde Park for its historic significance. The other thing that isn't always apparent is Hyde Park has a halo effect for the area surrounding it. You know, people who live off of Platt Street, west of our neighborhood, they like to be able to walk into Hyde Park. or west of the crosstown along Swan. There has actually been plenty of opportunity for the public to attend informational meetings over the last several years. These have been well attended, so it's hard to gauge how you're not informed about it unless you're not really engaged in the neighborhood that much. While there were many supporters of the expansion at the meetings, there were valid concerns raised, and they've come up in here before. It's important to address those concerns, and I think Dennis has done a good job. Expansion of the historic district does not change existing land use and zoning. There is a lot of latitude for non-contributing structures. I'm talking to the singing to the choir here because you oversee that, but there's a lot of latitude for non-contributing structures, those not identified as either historically significant and intact. There's opportunities for redevelopment. The contributing structures are the greatest value to the area and the main focus of historic guidelines and preservation. A successful local realtor just studied sales in South Tampa and found a 29% per square foot premium for houses in the historic district, the local historic district, compared to other areas adjacent that are historic, including neighborhoods like New Suburb. Value, dollar value. The historic district has a commercial presence with Hyde Park Village, which has evolved into a very great amenity. Howard Avenue is undergoing much needed improvements and redevelopment, some of which is commercial and within the historic district. So commercial presence is a critical part of the district. We recognize that, and inclusion is welcome. So as I mentioned, the adjacent areas have benefited greatly from the local historic district, and it is time to include them to assure the value of the Hyde Park overall neighborhood. Once again, thank you for your and the ARC's time, effort, and diligence. This process has been long in making. Your deliberations and requests for more information reflect the thoughtfulness you have put into this. Please move this proposal ahead to City Council. And once again, thank you very much.
Commissioners, we'll now move to the public comment portion of the meeting. I have, that have been presented to the office, to my office over the last few days, a number of letters. You have those letters included in your packets. There are 33 letters that have been presented that are either requesting to modify or to outright oppose the expansion of the district. I believe there's some of these individuals in the audience today. They can clarify the nuances of that. And there's 9 letters or emails from individuals that support the expansion as proposed. I'm going to ask for a motion to receive and file these letters into the record, please.
So moved.
Second, please.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
During the public portion, comment portion of this hearing, any individual that is going to speak does have 3 minutes to speak. There is an indicator of the time that's up here on the left of the podium that will cue them to their time remaining. And then there'll be an audible reminder at 30 seconds remaining and at close. So we ask that in the essence of time that individuals adhere to the time limits. Any individual that has a speaker waiver form, if they could present that speaker waiver form to Ron when they come up to the podium, we'll provide that to our legal counsel and calculate the additional time that you will receive. We've had a few people I noticed through my peripheral vision walking in a little late, so I'll ask for a swear-in. Any individuals that walked in after this original swear-in, if you could please stand and raise your right hand. With that, Madam Chair, I believe we can begin the public comment portion.
I would ask, please, that you form a line so that we can make our time a little bit more expeditious as we move from one speaker to the next. And please be mindful, speakers, that you should state your name and your address as you as you are at the podium prior to your remarks. And if you've got the speaker waiver forms, again, please present them to Mr. Vila over here so that your time can be determined. With that, may we please proceed with the public comment?
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Linda Saul Senna, and I live at 157 Biscayne. I'm here tonight to tell you that this effort didn't begin in the 80s, it began in the 70s. I was a young planner writing the Hyde Park plan beginning in 1976. And we saved Gorey School, and we made steps toward moving ahead with the historic district. As you all have noted, everything took much, much, much longer than we anticipated. The inclusion of an expanded area was always part of our thinking. And that's why the National Register District is larger. It is unfortunate, as you all viewed the numbers of contributing versus non-contributing structures, that it didn't initially include the entire area. The good news is there are still a majority of contributing structures, and we're here today to ask you, as historic preservationists in Tampa, to respect expanding the boundaries. Hyde Park deserves the protection. It makes economic sense, it makes cultural sense, it makes sense in protecting our history. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Hi, I'm Leah Carden. I live at 311 South Delaware Avenue. I'm also the Vice President of Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association. I've lived in my house since 2007, so 15 years. When I moved in, neighbors brought over all kinds of food because it was being used as a frat house before I inhabited it. So I am here to ask you to go ahead and support the process of moving forward with the local historic expansion. I don't think I have much to add, but I'll reiterate what some of the others said. We've been working on this for years. It started 5-7 years ago when Dennis and Elaine started having these conversations with us. And we wanted to move forward with the initiative. It ended up getting intercepted because of COVID, and we kind of stalled because of that, but it has been going on for years. We have provided notices, meetings, emails, signs, everything that we can to educate the community and the neighbors, and we do know that we have support from a lot of the neighbors. I live in one of the contributing structures, and I definitely support it, and I'm asking that you will continue to move the process forward. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tara Nealon. I'm at 1405 West Azeel. I've lived in my home for 2 years. Prior to that, I lived in HHPNA for 11 years. I am here in support of the expansion for a variety of reasons, including honoring and preserving the historically contributing structures and the contributions to the city by Richard Doby, whom you heard Dennis speak about earlier. Of the structures and the land attributed to Richard Doby, the churches and the school, they no longer exist, but his home remains. Being the current owner of the property at 1405 West Azeel, it is of great importance to protect the home and the neighborhood to keep Richard Doby's contributions to the city of Tampa and the neighborhood a part of our history. If you weren't already aware, and you did hear others mention this today, in March, Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association did host their 20th annual home tour. This year, a guided tour of parts of Dobyville in Spanish Town Creek were led by Rodney Kite Powell at the History Center. One tour was added, and it sold out. They added another, and it too was sold out. The interest and support for the history and preservation in the neighborhood is truly incredible. Thank you.
Excuse me, can you say your last name one more time, please?
Neelan, Nelan.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Ernest. I live at 412 South Oregon Avenue in Tampa. It's one of the properties that was photographed in the original presentation earlier today. I object vehemently to being included in a district that I did not agree to when I purchased the property. I just purchased the property last year. I've spent $300,000 in the past 4 months trying to renovate the property. I've put up a fence. I currently have a permit application to do a driveway in the front. I've spent a lot of money, a lot of which is not refundable. And now there are things that would not be able to be approved if it were included in this historical district. To me, showing that this local district did not consider this proposed expanded area to be relevant, important, or historical enough several decades ago when they created the historical district means that it wasn't important enough then. Why is it important now? They should have included it back then. Only 50% of the properties are even included, that are being included in this potential expanded area are considered contributing. 50%. That means 50% of the property owners in this area aren't. There's no reason to penalize those property owners on something that they did not agree to when they purchased the property. At the very least, if this commission believes that this expansion area should be approved, we believe that the non-contributing properties, and they've been able to determine which ones are contributing and which ones are not, that the non-contributing properties that are in existence now, that items that are either in existence or are pending or are in the middle of construction, that those not be prohibited or be required to be removed as far as what's required under the commission, under the local district. We also believe that there should be a reduction or no fee for the non-contributing properties for any application, because that would only contain a new paragraph in whatever your requirements are to be able to reduce or get rid of those application fees, because there's really no reason for these non-conforming properties to have to pay that.
Good evening. My name is Cam Potter, and I reside at 407 South Newport Avenue. Wanted to thank the commission for the time and energy to review this. I do support the expansion. I've lived in the house for more than 28 years. Raised 2 children who've gone to Gorey, Wilson, and then on to Plant. So have raised a family. They've left, but I feel very connected to the community. The reason why my wife and I moved there in the first place was because of the character of the neighborhood. It's walkable, it's close to Bayshore, and the historic sense. It was mentioned earlier the halo effect that Hyde Park has in the surrounding neighborhoods, and I would say that that halo is much larger, actually. So I think Hyde Park is a gem of Tampa, and really is one of the defining neighborhoods of Tampa, and is the reason why we have people moving to this community, is because they enjoy what they see in the walkability and the historic nature of Hyde Park. I have lived there for 28 years, and what I've seen is a change. So there's absolutely been a change in the character of the neighborhood. A lot of old buildings have been demolished, and I want to make sure that the commission understands that many of these contributing homes, like my own, reside or sit on property that is zoned for multifamily use. And I think today's economics means that any house that is not totally restored or is large enough it will be demolished. So I think that this is an absolute moment in time where there's a choice to retain some of this historical character that I think will drive economic expansion and improvement throughout the area, Tampa Bay area, or to not promote the historic neighborhood and have these homes demolished and have a character that cannot be controlled and will be alien to the history of the neighborhood. With that, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Angela Ducos. I reside at 407 South Newport. I am Cam's wife. As he mentioned, I'm going to echo pretty much what everyone has said this far, most people. I am in favor of the expansion. We have lived in our home 28 years. It's a 1912 bungalow. In the 28 years, yes, we have renovated. We've kept the integrity of the bungalow. And what I have seen over the last 28 years, there's been some renovations of homes and buildings. Some of them have kept to the integrity of the neighborhood, and some of them haven't. And yes, there's some positive and there's some not so positive things about the expansion. But what I am advocating for is to retain that integrity of the neighborhood, retain those contributing structures there. Our house is zoned R24. So that means that they could knock down our house and build for 24 units on our single home property now. I have seen properties being knocked down more rapidly now in the past year to 2 years than ever before. Our neighborhood has improved vastly in the past 10 years. When we first moved there, it was, it's north of Swan, south of Platte, not really a great area at that time. There were some condemned bungalows. We ended up buying one, renovating it, but it's come a long way. And I like to keep that safe, the neighborhood. So I would hope that you all move forward with the expansion. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Japp. My family and I own the property at 211 South Boulevard.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. I see that you have a waiver form and two people signed that
Yes.
they would like to waive their time. So as a result, Madam Clerk, can you add 2 minutes to his time, please?
Thank you. As I said, my name is Michael Japp. My family and I own the property at 211 South Boulevard. I'm one of the folks that sent a letter asking for modification to the plan. But before I, get into my reasoning why, I just want you to know I'm not some person that's opposed to government control in every form. I served for 7 years as a deed restrictions enforcement guy in my neighborhood. I know how it adds value to residential neighborhoods. And I noticed that you have two distinct areas that you're looking to add on. You have the western area, which is on the west side of Willow, and then you have the area to the north, which is what I refer to as the infield. I call that the infield because if you've ever been to a NASCAR race, you'll know why I call it the infield. It's surrounded by the Platte Street Speedway, the Selman short track, Hyde Park, whatever you want to call it, and Boulevard right down in front of my building. It's simply, in my opinion, not an attractive place for someone to buy a home to raise a family, okay? And I do believe that the adding in the western area, which I just went ahead and walked a couple of times in the last few weeks to see it, because I'd never really been back there, I think it will add value to those homes. If I lived there, I'd be in support of this plan, okay? And I certainly don't oppose to that section being added. But, this initial speakers were kind of an eye-opener to me. I've been in my building working in it for 17 years. I've owned it now for 5 years. I have never heard one thing about this process, not one. Now, I hear that there was quite a bit of public outreach. If there was that much effort made, why was there not a 48-cent stamp put on an envelope every time one of these meetings occurred and sent to me? I don't understand that. So I was pretty much blindsided, and it really kind of upset me a little bit because I'm a CPA. I have no time to be here. I have no time to do what I'm doing right now to try to get your attention on this. Whatever the notification process was, it was incomplete. Now, if you look at the pictures I sent you, I sent a lot of pictures. The first 4 are some of the existing structures in the existing district. And then the next 3 pictures I sent you are structures that are in that western addition area. As you can see, it's very similar, and that's why I think you're doing a good thing by trying to add that. But if you then look at what's next, I just wanted to kind of give you a little humor with that igloo that I put in there that actually exists up just north of my neighborhood. So it's ugly, and yes, nobody wants to see that across the street, okay? But if you go walk the infield, it's a totally different character. We have all these major thoroughfares surrounding us. They're high speed, heavy traffic. I get fire trucks going by my office twice a day at least, and they are loud. We have homeless people that reside there all the time. Last year, I had a series of homeless camps all along the street there. After about a month, finally, they got cleared out. If you look at all those pictures from the street views of the infield, I think you'll appreciate the contrast between what you have south of Platte and what's north of Platte. If you could convince me that the area north of Platte could be a single-family market, I would be all in favor of this plan. No single-family person is ever going to want to buy my property. I also put an email in there that I sent to a real estate agent just in February, and I swore to tell the truth. I was not aware of this when I sent that email. That email is telling that realtor I have no interest in 306 South Boulevard. Why? Because it's in a district. I'm a commercial buyer. I'm actively looking for other commercial properties for my business. But I will not buy in a district because these restrictions only reduce the value of commercial properties. It decreases the number of buyers, and when you have the less buyers, you're not going to sell for as much. So this property, when I bought it in 2017, the only reason I bought it was because it was not in a district. I plan to keep it until I die, pass it on to my children, and advise them to never sell it. And with that in mind, I just signed contracts for new windows, new roof, paint, a lot of other repairs, over $100,000 that I'm going to do to this building over the next year. And it's all still going to be the same building. So I ask you to please, at minimum, if you're not willing to just drop that section now, this needs to go back to your staff. And they need to do this notice properly, where they bring me into this process 2 years ago, not 30 days before during my busy season. So just, in my opinion, what we have here, and another thing about the halo effect. The halo effect simply does not go north of Platte, not there. The infield is a round peg.
Can you please bring your comments to a close?
Yes. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Harold Dobie Jr. I am the great-grandson of Richard Dobie, and I'm delighted to be here tonight. I'm certainly in support of any effort that's going to preserve and protect Dobieville. I think Dobieville is very significant, not only for Hyde Park, but it's part of Tampa history. And it's certainly, as a Dobie, it's my history. And I was able to take the tour recently through Dobieville with my children, my daughters and my grandson. And I can't tell you the pride and just the joy that brought me. So I grew up hearing about Dobieville. Certainly it was not gone, but not what my family knew it was when I came along. And so I grew up with a sense of pride in Dobieville and pride in who Richard C. Dobie was and some of the things that he had accomplished. So I would encourage you, keep my comments very short. I did get a chance to talk to got to share this, I did get a chance to talk to my 82-year-old aunt who lives in Iowa, otherwise she would be here. Oh, I didn't tell you my address. My address is 1933 Tindaro Drive. I live in Apopka, Florida. And so my wife Frances and I drove over to be here this evening. But my aunt, Marlene, who lives in Iowa, grew up and had a chance to roam Dobyville and to be a part of Dobyville. She did not go to the Dobyville school because her family went to Seventh-day Adventist Church School. But I do have an uncle who is here, Booker Doby, who actually did go to Dobyville School. So I'm here in support to protect and preserve this area, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mary Lou Bailey. I live at 912 South Oregon Avenue. And in the first part of my precious time here, I'm going to address you as the current president of Hyde Park Preservation, Inc., the third neighborhood in the existing district. Our board considered the matter and the facts very, very carefully. Preservation is central to our mission, and we voted unanimously to support the expansion as it's been presented by the city staff. We are looking forward to this area enjoying the protections of protecting contributing structures from demolition, application of the Hyde Park design guidelines and the oversight of the ARC to both renovations and new construction, and the public notice and engagement process we find to be very valuable, and we think it'll be beneficial for that area to have those protections. Now I'm going to take off my neighborhood association president hat and speak as a citizen. I've lived in the district for 27 years. For 20 years in a historic bungalow that I renovated extensively, did additions and renovations to make it current with modern day living and raising a family. I now live in a newly constructed home, still in the district. I'm not letting go of my historic bungalow like somebody else just said. It's in my will to go to one of my daughters, and my current home is going to another daughter because I realize the value of properties in Hyde Park. But what I wanted to say was I have been very successful in working with the city and the ARC to do thoughtful renovations, additions, and now with new construction. I don't find it to be onerous. I found it to be very value add. And I think as people get educated about it, they will find that as well. Also, I noticed that there were not very many letters that were cited as being in support. I attended the neighborhood meetings. They were very well attended and very much in support. So I thought I would take a minute and ask anybody who's in support of this, please stand up. Very different story than what you got from the people that sent in emails, because they're taking their time, like I am, out of my busy professional and family life to come tell you how important it is and that we urge you to support the proposal. I want to end by thanking you for volunteering and serving and doing all the things that you do to protect the city of Tampa and our historic districts. We love you.
Hi, my name is Tasha Hines. I actually reside outside of the historic neighborhood at 2227 Soho Bay Court. And I kind of just want to talk about the actual effect, that halo effect that Hyde Park does actually have. I'm an immigrant to this country. I moved here when I was 17. And of all the places I've lived, I have never had a community welcome me more than South Tampa has. And I don't want to disagree with anyone, but I actually did live on the other side of Platte. I lived in a bungalow, I want to say about 5 years ago, and it's actually really sad to see that when I moved in there, the entire neighborhood came over to say hi. The neighbors walked my dog when I had to go to work. It was truly a community. There were kids playing across the street, and this is at the corner of Platte and Albany. So definitely I feel like families do live there. Unfortunately, that entire street is gone and has been replaced by fourplex townhomes, which actually now causes huge flooding issues in the alleys behind the homes. You know, so I just think that what I want to see is more of Hyde Park. I want to see it expand. I want everyone to have that feeling that I have, because people talk about the integrity, but it is really a spirit. I am welcomed As I walk my dog down the street, the people who own the homes, I know their faces. They know my faces. Some of these houses that are being built now, the townhomes, I have no idea who lives there. I just see cars coming and going. There's no sense of community in these places. And I just don't want to see that go away, because that is where the value is, in the people who live there and will continue to live there. And if we don't keep that and preserve that, it goes away. And it's not going to matter what we call what the districts are, if we call it Hyde Park, if we call it Dobyville, it's going to be gone if we don't protect it. So that's kind of, I hope. Thanks.
I'm Dr. Pawan Ratan. I live at 8.
Can you please spell your name for me, please?
Pawan Ratan, P-A-W-A-N, last name is Ratan, R-A-T-T-A-N, Dr. Pawan Ratan.
Thank you.
I live at 827 Bayshore Boulevard, but I'm here to speak about the properties on 701 West Platte, 709 West Platte, and 711 West Platte. Rather than having 3 people, I am representing my wife, who is sitting in the back, and my 3 children, who have a share in the properties. I want to give you my opinion. I very much believe in historical preservation. Ron Villa knows me, Elaine knows me, I have worked with them, I believe in preservation. But in this case, I'm glad that we got an opportunity, although we were never sent a letter. This is not only an overreach. Going north of Platte is an overkill. It is an utter overkill. And I think this opportunity will make you realize that when people are focused, sometimes they can miss, especially east of North Boulevard and north of Platte Street should not be part of this. I want to give you my historical perspective with Tampa. I believe in preservation. I came to Tampa in 1982, joined the University of South Florida. I was specifically told not to live in Hyde Park, where I loved a house, historical house. But I saw the change, so I moved to Davis Island. I saw what historical preservation can do. I can also see what overreach and overkill can do. All these people that spoke for historical preservation, I clap for them, but I want to remind them, they have not preserved what they were given. South of Platte Street, there is a constant creation of concrete squares. Where were they? Now they want to reach to the other area and go beyond that. No, that is wrong. I think the boundary was created for a reason at Platte Street, which is a very busy street. From my property, I can walk to downtown in 15 minutes. That is not part of historical area. I hope you will give a voice to the reason and stop overreach, which my wife calls an absolute overkill. Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Mark Linsky. My family owns property located at 503 West Platte Street, which is a professional office building and a commercial parking lot. We also own the property at 214 Magnolia, which is also a commercial parking lot. We've owned these properties going on 22 years. From a procedural perspective, the only written notice I ever received, ever, about this proposal is when I got the official notice from the city of Tampa with the map. Not one time did anyone from any association reach out to the people on the north side of Platte Street. And I'm specifically talking about on the north side of Platte, from Edison to the west to Hyde Park Boulevard to the east. It was very unfortunate. I contacted the city staff and they informed me that in fact they had outreach meetings with the various associations. Unfortunately, the associations did not seem it appropriate or desirable to contact what I call the commercial properties on the north side of Platte. I was told by city staff that if I would have gone on the city's website, I would have seen it. Of course, I don't go on the city's website, I have no reason to. I was also told by staff that various notices were posted on various properties. Again, I wouldn't know if I saw a notice would apply to the north side of Platte because, quite frankly, there's not much historical preservation on the north side of Platte. We did a little study, and here's what we found. There are 38 folios on the north side of Platte. again, in between Edison to the east and Hyde Park Boulevard to the west. Of the 38 folios, 24 of those properties are commercial usage. Bank of America, Truist Bank, my office building, various other restaurants. There's many, many retail and commercial usages of the 24. That leaves 14 left, okay? 5 of the 14 are attorneys' offices, CPA's office, as you heard, insurance offices of those types. This gentleman who just stood up, his building is used as a therapy office, among other things. That leaves 9 properties left. All 9 of the properties are multifamily. There is not one single family in the north section of what's being proposed that anyone lives in. There is one home, though. That's Peter O'Knight's home, which I think is a very important one. But that's already historically preserved. We ask you tonight not to include the area in the north side of Platt Street. We ask that you make a motion, and the motion is that you exclude from your proposed area the north side of Platt, and you affirm that. Everything else that anyone said here tonight, in terms of what they're trying to accomplish, I commend them for it. Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having us. My name is Reese Riggle. I live at 312 South Willow Avenue. It's a home that is in the area of expansion, half a block away from Platt. And it's a home that's in historic Dobyville. I've been involved with the neighborhood for a number of years and have met with probably hundreds of residents. Hyde Park is a success story, I think, as we all know. And part of its success story is due to the fact that parts of it are in the local historic area. I feel that these 2 applications that have been submitted to you for the expansion of the area are about 2 things. To finish what was done in 1988 to preserve Hyde Park and to protect a historically significant portion of our city of Dobyville, which wasn't discussed much several decades ago. The sense of community and neighborhood in this section is strong. Of the many people that I've spoken to over the years, that many of which couldn't be here tonight, they are galvanized whenever a land use or rezoning application comes up because they want the neighborhood to remain as it is and as it feels today, which you've heard testimony from a number of people. And when the issue of the possibility of expanding the local historic area comes up, nearly everyone I've spoken to supports it because it's the only and best tool that we have to protect historically significant structures and contributing structures. Another reason why so many, including myself, support it is that we don't want the area of expansion to turn into something like Courier City, Tampa Heights, and other portions of South Tampa, which could very well happen right now as we're receiving a lot of applications for demo as we speak. Another point that I want to make is that I don't feel that this is NIMBY, not in my backyard. We don't want, I'm all for the city to grow. However, I feel that this section of Dobyville and Hyde Park is unique in its history and the structures that it has. Everyone, homeowners and businesses, enjoy the benefits of the local historic area that the boundary brings. Hyde Park is a tourist destination, and we want to continue supporting that. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Tyler, and I live at 603 South Willow Avenue. I purchased this home almost a year ago now, and before that, I lived in Boston. Before I moved to my home, I lived in an apartment building with my 2 kids, and it was very busy. There was a lot of traffic. The garage was just terrible. So we decided we want to move, and my kids both go to Gorey and Wilson, and I looked at a number of different neighborhoods, but just really fell in love with Hyde Park, and I was sitting for the open house with my friend Tasha, who you just met, and there's kids walking by, strollers coming by, and it was really just lovely, and I knew we could make a home, that my kids and I could make a home there. Sorry, I'm nervous, but this is important. And so I've been so happy there. The neighborhood has been wonderful. My neighbors have come to meet me, and it's been really great. So, and I love that my kids can walk down the street, they can walk into Hyde Park, we can walk down to the water, and that's a very unique thing nowadays. So I'm for the expansion, and I want to preserve. So thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Tim Prue. I'm a lawyer. I actually came to Hyde Park back in 1983. That's about 39 years ago. And I bought a piece of property where my office is now. And there were 4 very rough boarding homes, I guess. They told me they were flop houses, whatever that meant. But I had to invite everybody to leave because it was very rough. And I did that. And I put up an office building right across the street from the Lighthouse for the Blind. It's on the north side. And it's a 2-story brick building with giant white columns called the Alexander Building after my first son. And I bought it, and after I bought it, I found out that the young ladies who were dancing at the Seven Seas bar would hurl their beer bottles in my parking lot at night. So I had to buy the property that they had and tell everybody to leave. Since that time, I own 6 pieces of property in that area. And candidly, it's much easier to be in favor of something than against it. I am totally in favor of taking care of historic districts for residential property. On the north side, there is no residential property. It's all office buildings. And I submit to you that had I not started way back when, 39 years ago, which is why I am in favor for the historical district for the south side, but for the north side, I'm requesting that the panel consider modifying any historical district not to include commercial property, because there's no historical reason for it. And the area has been cleaned up, I think, in the last, 39 years by people like myself that will go in there. And because there used to be a tremendous amount of homeless people that used to sleep on my steps. And eventually they left because the area began to get picked up. So I would request that the council modify the proposed expansion of the local Hyde Park Historical District not to include the north side of Platte. I thank you for your time.
My name is Carl Zalonka. Want me to spell it for you?
Yes, please.
Story of my life. Zielonka. My family came to Hyde Park in 1930.
Could you please give us your address?
My address is 450 Knights Run Avenue, Harbor Island. My family came to Hyde Park in 1930. They built one of the newer houses in what is now the historic Hyde Park District in 1940 at 819 South Edison Avenue. I arrived there in 1941 by the accident of birth. And I lived there for the first 18 years of my life. Having grown up there was a wonderful place to grow up. But as I neared retirement, I started working as a volunteer at the Tampa Bay History Center. And it was there that I started doing research on Hyde Park. And at age 70, I found out about Dobyville. How could I live 5 blocks from Dobyville and not ever know of its existence? And the more I read about it, and the more I started looking at maps and presentations I do for the History Center, I realized that Dobyville was omitted for a reason. And it may not have been said, but it's obvious what the reason was. That's where the help lived. And I think it's time we undid an injustice to the Dobyville neighborhood. I had no idea about the north of Platte Street portion of this. I agree with those speakers who are against that area. but I strongly urge you to do for Dobyville what should have been done 40 years ago. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Ursula Odom, and I live at 2007 Wishing Well Way. My affection for Hyde Park comes because I became a first-time home buyer by buying a property on Morrison Avenue. And then it extends to the fact that the little picture that you see of Dobyville with the Queen exists in a book that I wrote. And I found that girl and gave her a name. I know who she is. She is a real person. I also give a walking tour of Central Avenue, and I'm here to say I am disheartened at the number of times that I have to say, well, there's nothing here for you to see, but let me tell you what it used to be like. So anytime there's an opportunity to preserve something physical that we can point to and say that means we exist at some point, I'm all for. And this is going to be a little controversial, but I looked up the definition of cultural genocide. And it is eliminating the existence of a person's or people's culture. So in wartime, it is obvious. There are war crimes. In peacetime, it is silent, it's subtle, it's denied, and it's voted on. Voted on whether or not to acknowledge a history of a people. Dobyville represented a history of people. So if you can preserve any of those buildings, I'm all for it. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Janosek, and I will spell that for you. I can relate to Carl. It is Janousek. I currently reside at 275 Bayshore Boulevard. Technically, my building is not an expansion area, but I am here because I did want to indicate that I am in support of the expansion of the historic district. I feel it's very important to keep intact the history and integrity of areas of history, and thinking about history over time, areas that have been preserved in many years, whether it be in Tampa, across the country, or across the world. We realize over time that things may not be historic now, but over decades and time, we realize that they can be very historic and very important. There are placards all over Tampa and all over this country that indicate that it's very important. If those things had not been preserved, then there may not be history as we know it now. So, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Kelly McMillan. I am the current president of Hyde Park Neighborhood Association. I just wanted to address a few.
Could you please state your address?
I'm sorry, 2110 West Deacle Avenue.
Sorry.
My plan was just to address a few things that you've heard in the last 30 minutes or so. And one of the first things I want to mention is that Hyde Park Village is totally commercial, and it fits very nicely within Hyde Park. We all know that. We all love it there. So there's that. The other thing is that it's, I'm sorry. And it's hard to believe that those commercial properties are not better engaged with their neighborhood association. Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association has multiple business associate members outside the district and inside the district, and we're all very well informed. We key into what's going on in the neighborhood because it matters, and it matters to our business associates, and we appreciate that very much. I also want to point out that when commercial areas make changes, when they're going for rezoning or PDs or new building or whatever, residents only get 30 days notice. That's just the way it works. So I'm not sure what the big complaint is there. This is no different than how the process works. Lastly, I am so proud when people say, "Where do you live?" I'm a little embarrassed to say I live in Hyde Park because that seems a little pretentious, but I guarantee you, everybody that lives in Hyde Park that has a Hyde Park address is proud and pretentious and happy to say, I live in Hyde Park. Well, why not everybody that's in Hyde Park conform and be held to the same standards of the rest of us that live in Hyde Park? It's not that hard. These guys are great to work with. Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to make a comment? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and open it to the commission for questions and comments to the staff or to each other.
May I?
Yes, please.
So this is important to me at least, the question about the due process and notifications.
Kamaria Pettis-Malcolm from the City Attorney's Office. So due process is an issue that is discussed with staff. That is not for the board to discuss. That is not an issue or an item to address with the commission. Because
Why not?
Because that's not within your authority.
To ask whether the due process notice was done correctly?
It was, and that's why it's before, it was, and that's why it's
question.
before this commission.
Okay, so that's my first question. Wanted to make sure because there's been a number of questions about noticing. So I'm going to just go ahead and make my comments on this particular matter. I am concerned that there's some confusion about whether commercial property should be included within a historic district. Most historic districts have components of commercial properties, and they work fairly well. You can go to almost any large historic district in this country, and you will see a number of commercial properties who are successfully incorporated within the confines of that historic district. Even though your property, for example, a commercial property, like a residential property, even though it may be non-contributing, within the boundaries of the historic district, there is some protection for the other property owners that whatever that owner decides to do with their property, that there'll be some oversight, namely through historic district guidelines. So in my long experience in historic preservation, I haven't seen or know of circumstances where being in a historic district as a commercial property owner is necessarily a detriment. That's not for every single case. That's just been my experience 30-some years in the business. The area that's included in the proposed expansion includes a significant number of contributing structures, and had this area been included in 1988, there would be a whole lot more contributing structures, and as we all know, we've lost many in the last 34 years. I think it's important that we consider this proposed expansion as proposed by the staff in the map dated April 12, 2022. For the reasons that we need to protect the contributing and non-contributing structures, but more importantly, it will help to highlight the structures and history related to Dobyville. The boundary expansion will weave together a fractured historic district. When you look at the original boundaries that were established in 1988, anybody would look at it and say, now why did they not go all the way to Kennedy, which is where the federal government had initially proposed. But I wasn't here in 1988, I didn't vote, but you can certainly look at it and wonder, very interesting chunk has been taken out. So I'm hoping that by expanding the boundaries, that this will create a more cohesive and distinctive neighborhood, one that in my opinion should have been established fully 34 years ago, but here we are. And so I thank the Spanish Creek Civic Association and Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association and HPPI for pushing this forward and finally, hopefully, getting something done. Both Boulevard and Willow are gateways into Hyde Park, important ones. And as such, those properties on those streets, regardless of whether they're commercial or residential uses, many of the residential uses in this district are used as commercial properties. As we know, anybody who works in that district, I lived in Hyde Park for many, many years, and now presently work within Hyde Park. Most of those houses were built as residences and have been converted to some sort of commercial use. So that's the same on the other side of Platte. There's no difference from anything around Gorey, in those streets. Anyway, those properties and all the properties in the proposed district should be afforded the protection provided by the Hyde Park Historic District, namely the protection from demolition of contributing structures. As we've heard a number of times, the underlying zoning is making some of these properties very, very hot, from using a developer's word, and they are very vulnerable to being torn down. And the application of the Hyde Park design guidelines to renovations and new construction is also a very important component of residing within a historic district. For that reason, I certainly support the expansion of the Hyde Park Historic District as shown on the Hyde Park Historic District map dated April 12, 2022.
Thank you. Dr. Pluckham?
Hi, Dominique Cobb. Just wanted to, I have a few, I just want to say thank you for the City of Tampa Historic Preservation staff for going back out and actually engaging with the community. We did ask that of the last meeting that came forth about Hyde Park. So I do thank you for going back out and engaging the community even more. One of the things that I noticed when this came before the board was the significance of Dobyville. Unfortunately, I did not learn about Dobyville in school or growing up in Hillsborough County or City of Tampa. So I'm actually excited for people to Spanish Creek for coming back and actually presenting it to the board. And with my own research, I noticed that I was actually born in 1985, and that portion of Dobyville was hidden from the map, or it was not included. So I hope that we can take this chance now to not just recognize the contributing factors of the person, but also the properties that were given back to the City of Tampa to grow, not just the Hillsborough County School District, but the other amenities in the area. So I want to make sure that we recognize Dobyville, we include this for stabilization, and also we incentivize companies who come to this area. And also with Dobyville being so important and significant, I equate it to Eatonville, one of the areas really close to Tampa that was able to preserve that history. Unfortunately, Tampa missed the ball. They missed the ball by letting these properties that could have been contributed, they let them go to waste. So I hope that we can take into consideration today to preserve that, to incentivize the area and actually stabilize the pieces of property that are still available, so that this can be a historic site, so that this could be a place where not only people can learn about Dobyville, but actually see the tangible buildings there. Thank you.
Sure. Would you like to make a comment?
Yes, I actually have several questions of staff and a question about the modified area. Thank you, Mr. Fernandez, and thank you all for coming, by the way, and really good comments, and thank you to staff. They always do a good job. The first question is, do you know how many of the 102 contributing structures have retained their integrity? Or is that one and the same in this case?
Thank you, Commissioner. Dennis Fernandez, Architecture Review and Historic Preservation Manager. As part of this process, the staff has been out in the area, in the entire National Register Historic District, for quite some time, pre-COVID, doing a re-inventory of the area. So that was done with my staff. We started with the National Register inventory from 1985 as a baseline, and we moved on that as a reevaluation. There's been a number of structures, obviously, that are demolished or have been added, but there's been also structures that were modified. Some were modified from a previously contributing status to a currently non-contributing status, others the opposite. So the numbers that you see in the staff's professional opinion accurately reflect the ratios that are out there today.
For integrity?
For integrity.
Okay, thanks. And, sorry. You mentioned several persons, according to the criteria, other than, obviously, Mr. Doby, and I just learned something tonight about Mr. Knight. Of those persons that you mentioned, are they from or related to the expansion area?
Well, I think it's difficult to, recognizing a contemporary planning line on a map, to apply that to a delineation of the development pattern of the area, I think is probably flawed. So you have to look at Hyde Park. That's why I spent time talking about the Crosstown Expressway, because originally Hyde Park extended up to beyond Kennedy Boulevard, up to Kennedy and beyond. And Hyde Park Avenue and Hyde Park Place were corridors for people coming into stay at the Plant Hotel and going on outings, hunting outings and fishing outings down on what we refer to today as Bayshore Boulevard. So kind of taking off our sort of modern definition of what these contemporary introductions now kind of impose on us, we feel that the area that we're representing is Hyde Park, and the individuals who were, I want to emphasize that criteria was emphasized in the original designation, played just as significant of a role in the expanded area as well. I think the one caveat would be Richard Doby, who was not represented in the original designation, but I believe obviously warrants the same type of recognition.
And I just have one more question for you. Could you show the zoning map again, please? Sorry. And the blue is what? And the pink is what?
So the legend's a little bit difficult. I might rely on Elaine here for some of the nuances of this, but the blue is indicated on the map appears to be RM24, and the light blue, and then the dark blue would be RM16. So those are residential multifamily classifications that are differentiated by density levels, but certainly 2+ units per acre.
And by light blue, you mean mostly that area north of Horatio?
Correct.
Okay. I thought that was it.
Yeah,
It doesn't come out as blue on ours.
It's interesting when you go to the area, because this area north of Horatio and east of Willow, there's through conversation, I'm hearing distinctions of these areas. These zoning classifications were placed in much earlier, much later than the historic neighborhood plat was. These are a product of post-war planning initiatives. So if you're in the neighborhood and you're in these areas, the area east of Willow up to South Boulevard has a higher concentration of historic multifamily. So most likely, when the planners of that era determined what would be the appropriate land use, they felt multifamily. But at that time, I would only surmise that no one was thinking that single family would be somewhat supplanted by multifamily eventually, that more likely that they would coexist.
And thank you. And my last question, whether you all can point it out or one of the representatives of the modification petition, for lack of a better term, can someone point out the exclusion area that they are proposing, or does that group have a map of some kind. Just so we're all talking about the same thing.
So is that legible for you on you?
Yeah.
So, essentially, this east-west roadway.
So
is
everything north
Platt
of
Street.
Platt.
So, everything that would be between Platt Street and the crosstown is, I believe,
Okay.
the area that they're proposing. Now, our recommendation, the eastern boundary stopped at the center line of Hyde Park Avenue, so everything to the east of that wasn't included in the legal description that we provided to you already.
Okay, thank you.
I would make a point, though, in pointing out on this map that each of those shaded buildings is a contributing structure. And if this is included as an excluded area, each of those properties, unless they are dealt with in a different way, would not have the protection that they normally would get if they were included in the district. And if you count them up, there are 17 contributing structures that I could detect. I may be missing one or two, but out of 38 structures. So half of the structures are yet contributing, or are contributing to the national district. The blue line that has extended up to Kennedy, when the original survey was done to establish the national district, it clearly was evident that all of the properties within that blue-brown boundary, or the majority of the properties in that blue boundary, were considered contributing because that was what gave the strength to determining the original boundary. You can clearly see what happens when a highway comes through a neighborhood. The same thing happened in Seminole Heights. The same thing is now happening in Tampa Heights. The highways are not beneficial partners in neighborhood cohesiveness and neighborhood integrity. And I would suggest that I am in fact in support of the boundary as defined, and hopefully at some point in the future we can deal with the area north of the expressway in whatever manner might be appropriate at that time. But in order to protect the properties that are now on the north side of Platt, if they are not included in the district, they will lose that protection. The national district does not give them that added strength.
Dennis, since you're up here, can I ask a question that, for my own clarity, but also because it speaks to some of the issues that came up? Just, I see this a lot with the old National Register boundaries are often really jagged, and it seems like the staff, the city staff, and historic preservation staff elsewhere have made an effort to draw boundaries that are more kind of holistic and natural, maybe, or have natural bounding, and that's, I think, what we see reflected with the existing local historic district, but also the proposed expansion. Is my impression correct in that sort of take on evolution of thinking?
Well, I think the approach and the end product probably have different goals. So with a National Register listing, they usually will, just include the properties by splitting properties, leaving out a portion of a block, whatever that they feel to get the highest concentration for a definable area. So they may exclude, if you look, not used to paper anymore, so it's a little difficult to manage. you look at the area that has Hyde Park Village in it, was excluded from the national as a high concentration of new construction in it. So that being said, you know, the National Register really is a tool by which they seek recognition, and in doing so, they don't worry about maybe applying regulations as much, whereas the local historic district, it's certainly a regulatory tool, and it's much more effective to have you know, clear, definable boundaries.
Thank you.
So, commissioners, are there any other comments that you would like to make?
I have a lot of comment. I have a lot of random thoughts. I think the first question is, what's really practical? And eligible doesn't necessarily mean it should be designated, and is what is practical to implement. And for those of you who don't know me, I was the director way back when this was established, this district, and that is part of the reason why it is the way it is, because there were several reasons not to go the whole way of the National Register district. Everything from, frankly, what the condition of structures were on the north side, and the fact that there were a lot of absentee owners, and how much it would, whether it was affordable for people to actually meet it at that time. Obviously, that area has changed. But there were a lot of reasons. And as much as I agree that, I don't know where the notion came that commercial can't be designated, because it can and should in many cases. And that said, I know there are structures there north of Platte. I do think that's different. And again, I'm struggling with how to come down on this. And then kind of the ironic thing when I look at this, as a planner and as the person who did a lot of this zoning, that was another reason that the old area or the National Register area isn't the same as the local. There are a lot of different zoning issues there. And I think that's seeing all these PDs, these little PDs, and how we've all, not me, the city's become PD happy in order to allow things that perhaps shouldn't be there that big. To me, that's an underlying bigger challenge or bigger problem for this area than for these structures is the pressure of the zoning, the underlying zoning, especially for the commercial or where there are several structures that, or several lots that don't have contributing structures on them. So although I don't see any problem with designating commercial, it's true that most of Hyde Park is a single-family district, but you know, Ybor City was our first historic district. So that's, the fact that they're commercial is neither here nor there. Then I jumped to Dobyville, and I think Dobyville should be preserved, but I hear, oh, look at how we fractured this area and only designated half of it because we could get it in Hyde Park, but then we didn't designate the second half of it. And that's my thinking about Dobyville is are we taking only a piece with this one, and does that really undo the significance of it, because we're just taking less than half of it in this? And should it be its own district and take the whole thing? So will we do this and then forget about it later? So I'm really wrestling with what's really eligible versus what's practical. And I'll be quiet and listen to.
Dennis, did you have a comment to make to her remark about splitting the Dobyville area?
I think we have an opportunity to preserve part of Dobyville that includes Richard Doby's house. And I think now is the time to make that happen. That's my comment as the Historic Preservation Manager. As the facilitator of this application, the neighborhood associations requested that the Selman Expressway be the northern boundary of the historic district, and that's somewhat of a premise that we've been working under. We haven't inventoried the area that goes out to Albany and goes up to Fig. I can tell you with certainty the lumbers are going to be tremendously low. But we have some examples of Doby houses here. So we, as the author stated, you can take a tour and you don't have to just talk about what used to be there. You can see examples of what is there, including Mr. Doby's house. So I think that has value. And just as probably in 1988, there was a decision made by a board that they decided we should try to preserve what we can get at this particular moment. Sometimes, that falls on you in this role to make that determination if that's sufficient.
I think it is fruitless for us to try and conjecture as to the logic of how the original boundary was originally determined. Right now, we have an opportunity to expand it and make it more inclusive and create a neighborhood that begins to start to that will represent more of the inclusiveness of the neighborhood that the original national district had designated in the first place. And I think the staff has been very thoughtful and very thorough and very complete in their evaluations of the structures that are within these boundaries in order to make an appropriate recommendation.
I want to add one point if I could. There's been a lot of discussion about, two components of, I guess if we broke this down to the components through discussion of Dobyville and the area along Platt Street. I don't want the remaining area, that area that's situated to the east of Willow and to the proposed boundaries to kind of get overlooked, because there's some spectacular architectural examples in there. Along Horatio's, probably one of the best groupings of high style, craftsman style architecture that's in the historic district. As we kind of recognize, I think, the validity of the neighborhood's architectural past and cultural past, it's all working together to, I think, provide a deeper understanding of Hyde Park as a neighborhood.
So our task, commissioners.
Madam Chair, Kamaria Pettis-Malco from the City Attorney's Office. You've asked several questions of staff. I'd ask that you please, I don't know if I heard you correctly that you close public comment, but I'd ask that you please ask the applicants if they have any rebuttal to the questions that were asked of staff, or if they have any rebuttal at all from the public comment that was provided. The public comment?
Right.
Okay.
The applicants, so do I need to reopen the public?
If you, just as a order of caution, if you could just make if there could be a motion to reopen the hearing in case, I thought I heard you say the public comment
Right.
phase was closed, but as a caution, can you please ask for a motion to open the public hearing?
May I have that motion, please?
Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion to have public comment reopen for rebuttal.
I'll second.
Yes, it's not public comment, it's just to open the public hearing.
Could I ask to open public hearing?
Can you vote on the motion?
Yes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
And if the applicants could just come forward to state whether or not, if they have rebuttal or comments regarding the public comment that was previously provided in the staff questions.
Yes, thank you. Aaron Albritz, Hyde Park, Spanish Town Creek President. Aaron Albritz, Hyde Park, Spanish Town Creek President. Sorry for the suspense. I do not have a rebuttal.
Pat Chimino, Historic Hyde Park, HHP&A, I concur with that.
And now, Madam
Okay.
Chair, if you could just have a motion to close, you could just close the public hearing?
Now, may we close the public hearing? So is there a motion?
I move to close the public hearing.
I second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, now, commissioners, our task now is to craft a motion to make a recommendation to City Council.
If that's what this chair decides to do. Recommend
Right.
the expansion, you can modify the area that's presented in the map, or you could recommend or not recommend City Council
To-
expand.
I'm prepared to make a motion.
Okay,
I move to recommend that City Council approve the expansion of the Hyde Park Historic District boundary as shown on the Hyde Park Historic District map, period of historic significance, 1886 to 1933, dated draft April 12th, 2022, specifically that the proposed district expansion boundary be made as shown on this map with the green dots, that's the boundary of the expansion. For the following reasons: the properties in this case are associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. The properties are associated with the lives of people significant in our past. The properties embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or represent the work of a master, or possess high artistic values, or represent a significant and distinguishable entity whose components lack individual distinction, and that the properties have yielded or are likely to yield information important to prehistory or history.
Dominique Cobb, I would like to second the motion.
Can we,
is there a
yeah,
The discussion.
You want to make an amendment?
comment on the motion?
D is not recommended by staff. It's not,
Do you
I'm
want
not
to
opposed to it, but it's not supported by the documentation
Do-
provided.
do you want to make an amendment?
Can I amend that?
You can amend the motion, and Commissioner Shoecraft will have to accept the amendment.
Okay, I would amend your motion, your well-crafted motion, to the exclusion of criterion D.
Accepted.
And then if you could just have it in
And a
second to the
second
amended
to
motion.
the motion, please? The
Dominique,
change.
I would like to second the motion and amendment.
Okay, we have a motion and a second and an amendment and a second to the amendment on the floor. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
And if you could raise your hand as well.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously.
As a point of clarification, are there any requested modifications to the designation report that was provided to you?
I don't think
No.
so.
Do we need a motion?
I have not. Do you need a motion for that?
No, I just need confirmation. Okay. With that, then, your recommendation will be transferred to writing and conveyed along with this information to the Hillsborough County City County Planning Commission for a recommendation for City Council. Thank you.
All right. I would remind the staff, the commissioners, that the next date and time of the next HPC meeting is May 17, 2022 at 9 a.m. in this location. Is there any new business to be brought forward?
Not this evening. Thank you.
All right, then, we are adjourned. It appears to be 7:40 in the evening. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.